How to emotionally detach from someone. Carl Jung. Detach to reclaim your power. Some relationships feel like love until you realize they're built on the fear of being invisible without someone else. In this video, we dive into the psychology behind emotional dependency and mistaken love. Through the lens of Carl Jung, we explore how the ache you feel when someone pulls away, the panic over a missed message, or the need to constantly adjust yourself to be accepted are not signs of deep love, but signs of unhealed wounds. When love becomes anxiety, performance, or self-erasure, it's no longer real love, it's survival. And until we unlearn the lies we were taught about love, we remain trapped in cycles of attachment, projection, and emotional addiction. This video isn't just about heartbreak. It's about awakening, about learning to love yourself first, so that love no longer means losing yourself. Stay with us because the first step to true connection is to stop abandoning the person within, when love is no longer love, but the fear of abandonment. There are relationships that make us believe we're in love, but if we strip away all illusions, what remains is sometimes only the fear of being left behind, not because we're truly connected to a soul, but because we're terrified no one will see us anymore. If that person disappears, we cannot bear the emptiness when a message goes unanswered, when they vanish for hours without notice. That restlessness, that ache, could it be love? Or is it anxiety in disguise? From an early age, many of us are taught that to be loved, we must do something, be obedient, please others, avoid being a burden. So, as we grow up, love no longer feels like a natural presence. It becomes a performance to ensure our existence in the eyes of others. And when someone enters our life and makes us feel seen, needed, we call that love, but in truth, it's often a temporary sense of safety born from unhealed fears. Carl Jung once said that what we do not make conscious will rule our lives, and we will call it fate if we don't realize we're chasing love just to soothe our insecurity. We will eventually trade pieces of ourselves just to not feel abandoned in that process. What we lose isn't them, it's us. So the real question isn't how much do you love them, but if they left tomorrow, what would be left of you? The feelings you call love might actually be an addiction to a person. We often confuse emotional chaos for deep love. When someone stops replying to your texts, your heart races, your palms go cold, and your mind spirals into negativity. You check your phone obsessively, monitor their online status, and cling to any sign they're still around. These aren't signs of love, they're symptoms of emotional dependence, a psychological addiction we don't recognize. Just like an addict reaches for their fix to feel okay, we reach for their gaze, their smile, their presence to momentarily fill the emptiness. But like a drug, the feeling doesn't last when it fades. Panic sets in. The connection is no longer love shared between two free individuals. It becomes dependency. You need them to feel valuable, to feel alive, to numb the wounds that still bleed inside. True love doesn't make you lose yourself. It doesn't leave you in agony every time they don't show up. It doesn't trap you in a cycle of guessing whether you're being abandoned, when your emotions revolve solely around their presence or absence. When your inner world is governed by their reactions, you're no longer in love. You're in psychological addiction. Jung once compared the meeting of two personalities to the contact of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are transformed, but if only one person keeps changing to be accepted, while slowly dissolving into non-existence, that's not interaction. It's self-erasure, a state where you dim yourself just to hold on to someone who has become a psychological need. We weren't taught how to love, we were taught how to need. And because we need too much, we mistake it for loving deeply. But real love doesn't make you spiral when a message doesn't arrive. It doesn't make you lose sleep, wondering what they're thinking. It doesn't bind you with anxiety. True love comes from two emotionally healthy beings, not one desperate to be validated at any cost. So the next time you miss someone so much it hurts, ask yourself, am I loving them or am I addicted to them like a drug? If the answer is the latter, what you need isn't more love, you need healing. You are warping yourself just to keep someone around when you change your way of speaking, your hobbies, even your thoughts, not because you're growing, but because you're afraid of losing someone. What you're doing is not loving. It's self-destruction. True love never demands that you reshape yourself into a version they'll accept. Yet many people enter relationships with the silent fear. If I show who I really am, they'll leave. You start adjusting yourself little by little, laughing more quietly because they say you're too loud, hiding your feelings because they say you're too sensitive, abandoning passions because they don't care about them. You think this is sacrifice, that it's love, but in reality, it's how you contort yourself every day just to remain in someone's life. You're no longer you. You're a carefully curated image, designed to survive in someone else's gaze. This distortion doesn't happen overnight. It creeps in silently, piece by piece. You stop hearing your inner voice. You start asking, will they like this? Before you ask, do I? Each time you stay quiet to avoid conflict, each time you suppress pain to avoid judgment, you step further away from yourself. Carl Jung once said, I'd rather be whole than good according to someone else's definition. But being authentic in a world that thrives on control, judgment, and abandonment is not easy. So we opt for safety, wearing masks tailored to others' expectations, hoping they're attractive enough to make them stay. But the more beautiful the mask, the further we drift from our truth. What's sad is, often the other person never asked you to change, you did it. You assumed, if I'm not like this, they won't want me. And in doing so, you stop living from love and start living from fear of rejection. The relationship becomes less of a union between two real beings and more of an ongoing performance where you're too afraid to reveal the parts of yourself that are still unfinished. The problem isn't just that you're pretending. The problem is that you start believing the new version is actually you. Until one day, you can't tell which emotions are truly yours and which are scripted. You see yourself through someone else's lens, no longer trusting your own intuition. If a relationship makes you lose your voice, your light, your emotional freedom, that's not love. That's submission for the sake of survival. And no one is worth losing yourself for, because if they only stay for the role you play, then who they love isn't really you, but the character you're trying to become. Love, or just a painkiller for the emptiness inside. There are moments when you feel an overwhelming peace, not because you're truly okay, but because they just texted you. One simple message like, "What are you up to?" can instantly soothe your inner anxiety. But when they disappear for a few hours, panic returns like a flood. You don't know what to do with yourself. You call this love, but in truth, it's using someone as a painkiller. The emptiness inside you wasn't caused by them. It's been there long before, maybe since childhood, when you first felt you weren't enough, unless you did something to be loved. You grew up with that fracture. You never learned how to sit with loneliness, with unanswered questions, with uncomfortable emotions. Instead, you learned how to run from them by clinging to someone who temporarily makes you feel whole. They become a warm blanket for a cold soul. But they're not the cure, they're the distraction. When you're fixated on, where are they? Do they still love me? What did I do wrong? You don't have to face the more terrifying question, who am I without them? Carl Jung once said, who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens. But looking inward is much harder. It doesn't offer instant gratification like a reply or a compliment. It's a slow, quiet path with no guaranteed outcomes, no guides, just you. And that's why many avoid it. They seek relationships not to share inner wholeness, but to fill an inner void. The deepest pain isn't losing someone else. It's realizing you've never truly had yourself. You've never learned to be alone and still feel whole. And until that's healed, you'll keep attaching emotionally, not because you love them so much, but because you don't know how to live without feeling needed. True love doesn't arrive to numb the pain. It comes after you face that pain, walked through it, and stopped using others as a crutch. It isn't a soft pillow to lean on forever. It's a mirror that reflects the person you've learned to love and accept. So before you ask whether they still love you, ask, without them, do I still know how to love myself? If the answer is no, then what you need isn't another lover. It's the journey back to your inner self. Because no one can be your forever painkiller, but you can be your most lasting source of healing. Love expands you. Dependency constricts you. Don't confuse the two. There's a dangerously common misconception that the deeper the love, the more painful, possessive, and suffocating it must be. But that's not love. That's confusion, mistaking love for dependency. True love doesn't imprison anyone. It doesn't make you someone who has to constantly control, cling, or sacrifice yourself to keep another person. On the contrary, love makes you expand to become more authentic, courageous, and free. But why do so many accept relationships that slowly strangle them and still call it love? Because society teaches us that love means holding on, sacrificing, enduring. From movies to songs to tragic love stories, we've been fed the idea that love equals pain, loss, and gripping so tightly we can't breathe. So when love shows up without drama, without torment, we start doubting it. But Jung thought differently. He believed love is not about possession. It requires no locks, no chains, no forced commitments. Real love is inviting someone into your life not to complete it, but to share in the wholeness already within. When you love someone, you don't cling to them out of fear they'll leave you. Let them be free and still choose each other. Every day, it's freedom with responsibility, not obligation disguised as romance. Dependency is different. It's born of fear, because you fear losing them. You hold on, because you hold on. You control, because you control. You suffocate, and then you begin to choke the other person with your own fear, calling it love. You are no longer you, and they are no longer them. Both become distorted versions of the self, manipulated by fear of loneliness and uncertainty. Love becomes a tug of war between two wounded egos. You must understand, if you have to hold on to someone through self-denial, sacrifice, and losing yourself, then it is no longer love. It's captivity. Love without freedom, without self-growth, without room to breathe, no matter how poetic it sounds, is still dependency. Imagine a love without bondage, where you can be yourself, and so can they, where you don't have to hide emotions to avoid conflict or walk on eggshells to avoid abandonment. A space where both people grow, make mistakes, repair without having to lose themselves to be loved. That is love built not on fear, but on awareness and choice. To reach that kind of love, you must have the courage to unlearn everything you thought love should be. Love that clings, love that fills voids, love that soothes your insecurities. You must relearn how to love where freedom and attachment aren't contradictions, but companions. Because true love is inviting someone into your life not to save you, but to expand with you, not to complete you, but to fly alongside you. Letting go isn't refusing to love. It's choosing to love yourself first. Some breakups don't happen because love ends, but because, finally, you have the courage to stop holding on to someone who requires you to abandon yourself, to stop calling exhaustion effort, repetition fate, and silence understanding. And when you let go, it's not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself more. Letting go is one of the most misunderstood acts to outsiders. It looks like surrender, like failure, like turning cold. But to the one who's lived it, letting go is an act of bravery. It's the moment you realize you can't rescue something you're the only one fighting for. It's the clarity that love alone is not enough if it costs you your sense of self. Carl Jung once said, "There is no awakening without pain," and letting go is a kind of awakening. It's not loud or dramatic. It's a strange stillness in the middle of emotional storms, the quiet knowing that to preserve what's left of yourself, you must release what's been taking you apart, not because you want to, but because you need to. You once thought staying was love, that trying again was love, that forgiving one more time was love. But there's another kind of love, quieter, more mature, that knows when to stop. And you can't learn that unless you've once betrayed yourself trying to hold on to someone while falling apart inside. Letting go doesn't close your heart. It opens it in a new way, in a way no longer ruled by the fear of loss, no longer hinging your emotional life on someone else's response. You begin to recenter yourself, not as a satellite spinning around another's orbit, but as your own axis. You step out of the cycle of hope and heartbreak and return to the only place you've ever had any real control, yourself. Letting go doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop using love as an excuse to suffer. It means you stop justifying what no longer nourishes you. It means you stop sacrificing your dignity for mere presence. It's facing the truth. If you have to lose yourself to keep someone, then you've already lost what matters most. When you choose to let go, you choose to begin again, not as two people, but as one you. You'll feel lonely, confused, even numb, but eventually, you'll feel peace. Not because someone is calming your chaos, but because you no longer need to be calmed, because you've learned to hold yourself through the storm. And one day, you'll look back and understand, letting go wasn't the end of love. It was the beginning of a healthier, deeper love, a love for yourself. Become yourself before trying to be someone's other half. In entangled relationships, people often seek to harmonize by bending, compromising, even transforming themselves to fit the other. We think love means being someone's other half, finding the missing piece to complete the puzzle. But that's a sweet illusion, and a dangerous one. Because if you don't know who you are, how can you know whether the love you offer is coming from your authentic self? Carl Jung called the journey of becoming oneself individuation. It's a lifelong path back to your inner center, where your truest self exists, undistorted by expectations, fears, or social roles. And only when you walk that path with firm steps can you love without losing yourself, because you no longer seek love to fill you but to share what's already full. In reality, many enter relationships with a long list of what they need from others: safety, validation, purpose, self-worth, and when the other person fails to provide it, they feel disappointed, empty. But the issue isn't the partner. It's that you never built a solid foundation within yourself to begin with. When you haven't individuated, when you haven't completed your inner self, you're easily swept up in someone else's emotional storm. They're sad. You're sad. They withdraw. You panic. They go cold. you unravel suddenly. Your entire existence revolves around them. You're no longer an individual, but an emotional shadow driven by external needs. Jung didn't advocate avoiding relationships, but he warned, if you've never faced the shadow parts of yourself, the pieces you hide, deny, or refuse to admit, you'll project them onto others. You'll love from wounds. Not maturity, the relationship will repeat old pain, not heal it. So the first thing to do isn't to find the other half. It's to find yourself, not the person you try to be for love, but the one you are when no one's watching, when no praise is expected, when it's just you with yourself. You don't need someone to complete you. You need a self-aware version who knows who they are, what they want, what they won't tolerate. Real love will come, but not as a rescue. It will arrive as a reward for having found your own wholeness. Love isn't running to find someone who makes you whole. It's entering a relationship already whole and ready to share it. That's when love stops being an escape and becomes a place of mutual growth. When love turns you into a shadow of someone else's emotions. You once believed love meant becoming one, that two people should sink so deeply they feel each other's every movement. But there's a fine line between deep empathy and emotional enmeshment. When you live entirely through someone else's emotions, happy when they're happy, anxious when they're distant, lost when they're silent, you're no longer yourself. You've become a shadow, reflecting their moods while silencing your own. At first, it felt like depth, like love that pays attention, that cares. But slowly, you lose your sense of direction. You can't tell which emotions are yours and which are just reactions to fear of abandonment. You've become subtly dependent, not on their physical presence, but on the psychological state they create in you. Love, without healthy boundaries, quickly turns into emotional chaos. You start shaping your entire day around their mood. They're cold. You worry they're distant. You blame yourself. They pull back. You feel invisible bit by bit. You get pulled into an emotional spiral you no longer control. Jung once said that if we don't make peace with our inner shadow, we'll project it onto others. Ironically, when you haven't yet connected with your true self, you're also easily sucked into their shadow. You become the emotional carrier, the one who holds their pain, their damage, even their avoidance, and you call that love. But love doesn't mean forgetting your personal boundaries. Love doesn't mean becoming the one who endures. You can walk beside someone, listen to them, but you're not obligated to keep someone else emotionally stable while you're falling apart. If love makes you surrender your inner peace every day, it's no longer connection, it's dependence. To love is not to react endlessly to another. It is to stand firm in your own emotional center. When you stay rooted in yourself, you don't sway with every wave they send your way. You still love, still care, but you don't lose your clarity. And from that solid ground, you can finally love in a healthy way without control, without burden, without imprisoning yourself inside someone else's emotions. You return to yourself, a person who feels deeply, but also knows the boundary that protects their own being. Painful relationships don't repeat because you're foolish, but because you haven't awakened yet. Have you ever looked back and wondered why you keep falling into the same kinds of relationships? The people change, the circumstances shift, but the ending feels eerily familiar. Disappointment, anxiety, confusion, and emptiness. You blame yourself, think you're naive, blind, weak. But the truth is more complex. You're not weak. You're just not awake yet. You're reliving an old script, written long ago in your unconscious. Carl Jung once said, "What you do not make conscious will appear in your life as fate." The painful relationships you've experienced weren't random accidents, they were reflections of your inner world. Until you uncover the roots of your wounds, You will continue attracting people who strike the same chords, not to punish you, but to give you another chance to see. Most painful relationships aren't driven by malice, but by the unconscious. The other person may not be intentionally hurting you, but they trigger parts of you that are still unhealed: fear of abandonment, feelings of unworthiness, the longing to be rescued, and you, unknowingly, are drawn to them like a childhood pattern where once you tried everything to be loved, but never felt enough. That cycle won't end simply by changing people. If you don't change your awareness, you can leave someone. But if you haven't awakened, you'll repeat the same story with someone else. So the question shouldn't be, why are they like that? But rather, why did I accept that again? The deepest pain isn't that someone hurt you. It's that you've trapped yourself in a loop of repeated hurt without understanding why. But the moment you stop and observe yourself honestly, without blame or defense, you begin to recognize the invisible patterns shaping your emotional life. And that is the first step to freedom. You don't need to become hardened or emotionless to stop getting hurt. You simply need to be awake enough to know the difference between love and a loop, and you have the power to step out of that loop, not because you don't love them, but because you're finally learning to love yourself in a more conscious way. When you awaken, you stop repeating and start creating. You no longer live from old instincts, but from a new awareness, one that is free, mature, and deeply human. Awakening from the illusion of love. When you're in love with their potential, not their reality. Many people aren't in love with the person standing in front of them. They're in love with an ideal version in their head, someone who will change, become gentler, more mature, love them the right way. Someday, but that someday never comes. And while you wait for the uncertain, you sacrifice your youth, your self-respect, and your peace of mind for someone who may only exist in your imagination. Loving someone's potential is a sweet trap. It makes you feel patient, devoted, deep. But if you look closer, it's not love, it's denial. You're fighting the reality of what is, clinging to what has never existed. You don't love them for who they are, but for who they could be if they changed, if they grew, if they started listening. But you're not loving from the heart, you're loving from expectation. Carl Jung warned, idealization is an unconscious way to avoid seeing the truth. When you put someone on a pedestal, you no longer see them as a person, you see them as a dream, and you shrink in the shadow of that dream. You ignore red flags, wounds, boundaries, but because you believe, if I just try harder, they'll become the person I'm waiting for. But they don't change, not because they're not good enough, but because they're not ready, or simply don't want to. And you, loving an illusion, slowly lose yourself. When you finally wake up and see that you've been loving something that never really existed, that is when you reclaim your freedom, not because you stopped loving, but because you accepted reality and chose yourself over a fantasy. Forgiveness isn't for them to stay. It's for you to be free. In the process of letting go, many people confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. They think that forgiving means going back to how things were, means continuing to endure, to carry the burden, just to keep the relationship alive. But that's not forgiveness. That's fear of abandonment, wearing the mask of kindness. And if you keep forgiving just to hold on, you'll only lose more of yourself. True forgiveness isn't an act toward the other. It's a decision for yourself. It's when you choose not to let resentment, pain, or unmet expectations control your emotions anymore. Forgiveness doesn't mean they deserve it. It means you deserve peace. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that is unresolved within will appear outside as fate." If you don't forgive, don't truly release the emotional weight, you will repeat that same pain with someone else, in a different form. You'll continue drawing in relationships that hurt you in the same way, and you'll keep wondering why. Forgiveness isn't absolution. It's reclaiming emotional sovereignty. It's when you look at someone who hurt you, and your chest no longer tightens. You no longer blame. You no longer wish for them to come back or change. That's when you've truly stepped out of their orbit. To get there, you need to understand something vital. They are a wounded person too. They are not evil, they're simply acting from their unhealed places. They may be cold, selfish, careless, not because they want to hurt you, but because they haven't learned to love in a healthy way. They weren't mature enough to hold you, but you don't have to stay and heal them. Forgiveness is seeing them clearly, as they are, no fantasy, no hatred, no coloring in the lines, and still choosing to walk away, not to punish them, but to free yourself from a connection that no longer feeds you. And from that moment, you enter the highest form of love, loving without clinging, letting go without bitterness, leaving with compassion, because you've forgiven not to reconnect, but to begin true freedom. When you stop holding on what will you live for, when love ends, people often feel a deep emptiness, not just from losing someone, but from losing the emotional anchor, the meaning they'd tied to that relationship. Many people don't just love someone, they depend on the relationship to feel like they exist. And when they have to let go, what hurts isn't just the person, it's not knowing what's left. We're taught how to love, but rarely taught how to live without needing others to feel valuable. Society sells us stories. Having a partner equals happiness. A stable relationship equals maturity. So when a relationship ends, people feel like they haven't just failed in love, but in life. Carl Jung believed humans don't only seek happiness, they seek meaning. And if love was your only source of meaning, then when it disappears, life feels hollow. But love, no matter how profound, is only one part of a full life. It cannot be your sole foundation. What holds you steady is the connection you have with yourself, with your values, your purpose, your personal truth. So when there's no hand to hold, what will you hold on to? When there's no one to live for, what will you live for? This is the question. It's not easy, but it's essential. It pushes you to face the deepest part of yourself, not defined by a relationship, but by your awareness. And when you touch that answer, you'll no longer fear loneliness, because you'll know life isn't something to be loved for, it's something to be lived from, rooted in your essence. Meaning isn't found in having someone beside you. It's found in what you pursue, create, give, and grow into a project, a passion, a creative journey, or simply the ongoing exploration of yourself. When you stop seeking meaning through others, you begin to find it in each conscious moment. And then you realize letting go doesn't make life meaningless. It gives you back the chance to find true meaning, not through someone else, but through you. No more dependence, no more clinging, just a human being learning to live for themselves and for something greater than the fear of being left behind. The lies society taught you about love and how to break them. We grew up surrounded by dramatic love stories. The more pain, the deeper the love, the more jealousy, the more real, the more you can't live without someone, the more true it must be. But no one told you those things are mostly illusions. What you've called love may often be possession, fear, or the need to feel whole. Society romanticizes suffering in love as if heartbreak is proof of authenticity. But Carl Jung wouldn't call that love, he'd call it projection. When you cast all your unhealed parts onto someone else, hoping they'll make it whole. Real love doesn't demand that you disappear. It doesn't ask for your suffering. It certainly doesn't require that you sacrifice your freedom to earn someone's presence. It's time to unlearn those lies. Love isn't a contest of who hurts more. It's a space where you can Be yourself whole, safe, and free, not to lose yourself, but to understand yourself more deeply. And from that place of awakening, you no longer seek love as a rescue, but as something beautiful to share. When love begins within, in the end, the journey of letting go doesn't take you away from love. It takes you back to its true source, within you. There is no drama, no promises of forever, no saviors, only a person slowly coming home to themselves, listening, learning, choosing love, but no longer losing themselves in the process. You don't have to be strong right away. You just need to be awake enough to look clearly, honest enough to admit that what you once called love may have been part of your unhealed pain, and brave enough to step away, not to close your heart, but to open it differently, deeper, healthier, if freer. Real love doesn't begin when someone arrives. It begins when you choose not to abandon yourself anymore, when you stop begging to be loved and start learning to love yourself with the kindness, patience, and understanding you once gave so freely to others. And from that place, every connection that follows becomes a gift, not a lifeline.